if you can imagine a man who was a hard-headed mathematician and a physicist suddenly confronted with things like the human psyche and what goes on in terms of metaphysics and having to do his homework in this area, probably, in my view, I was not around there anymore, but in my view, it was probably rather nauseous to him at first. In any case, he found the basic problem was the time locks or the time references of the individuals were not referenced through the ship's reference. He had to develop a system to lock the individual time references for each individual on board the ship to the ship's zero-time generator reference and see that they remained locked and were not ripped loose. This required a whole new approach. He had to develop a computer, and of course he is the father of the modern electronic computer, which he worked on at the Institute roughly from about 1949 through 51, had a working model about 51, 52, and after, and not knowing myself the details of how it was solved in terms of the actual hardware, it was solved. In 53, they did have finally a successful test with another ship. The Eldridge was long gone. It was in the Greek Navy by then. And they had no personnel problems. It was solved. And then the project name was changed. Project Rainbow was dropped, and it became called Project Phoenix. There was many aspects to Project Phoenix, other than the ones I described. That basically was the nature of the problem. You had to find a way to reference the individual's time locks and the time reference points to the ship so that no matter which way the ship went, where it went, whatever happened to it, each individual was referenced to the ship's reference and remained locked to that reference. So when the fields were turned off, the individuals are where they belonged and where they had been.
Does that answer your question, Francis?
I understand there was a space reference there somewhere.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
I understood earlier that there was a spaceship reference or something.
No reference. There were, in the last days before the final test, there were 3 UFOs sitting over the Eldridge. At what height, I don't know. I don't recall having seen them myself, but they were seen. And they had no part in the experiment per se, but they were observing. And the stories that we got since then, not at that time, but the inference was at that time perhaps they were trying to warn us. Since then, we've learned that they may well have been trying to warn us not to proceed with the experiment. But this, again, is conjecture at this point. In any case, they were there at the time of the final test and experiment. One of them disappeared. One of the ships was pulled into hyperspace along with the Eldridge.
Oh, boy. How's that, Francis?
Went along these lines.
I don't know anything of that specific experiment or scenario that you described.
I didn't think you would, but I wanted to, this sort of along those lines. And I know that I interviewed that one witness that they were going on around 4 years prior to 73.
Mm-hmm. Interview what witness? What do you do, Mr. T, that you can interview witnesses?
Well, see, in the process of getting my information, why I talked with various people. I just said witness. I don't know. There's a friend of mine that I talked to, and he had witnessed this situation. And I'm just wondering if there's anybody out there that's seen. My guess is if they were experimenting then, they've definitely got it perfected by now.
You might be able to ask Virgil Armstrong that tomorrow night, or Clifford Stone on Friday night. They might be able to help you more.
Since you, have you gone back to your 83 location and seen any of the buildings or situation there? And do you recognize any of the stuff that's going on there of the 83 location?
Yeah, that location on Long Island I did revisit in August 1985, when I was invited out there by 2 friends who I met at the USPA conference in Dayton, Ohio a month earlier. And we went out on Montauk, which by that point was an open base because it had been carried by GSA as surplus property for many years. And that was one of the interesting aspects of concealment of the project. It was conducted right under the noses of the government as on a surplus abandoned base. And we went out there and we wanted to go through the area. And certain of the buildings were open and certain were closed. And you could see that there was an underground, several entrances which had been filled in with poured concrete. The main radar tower, which was still intact, and the antenna still intact on the roof. We eventually did get in there, and there's a lot of equipment left. It was just too heavy to move out. And in the process of going through this old area and this equipment, the feelings one had impinged upon oneself, the vibes, if you will, were absolutely horrendous. They were unbelievably bad and very, very strong. And it was after more than one visit, several visits out there, that I began to realize that something very, very strange had been going on there. And I was not alone. There were 3 people, and there was a group that came in from Phoenix at one time to investigate the area. They were impressed with the strangeness of that location and the equipment that was still left. Some of it was just so heavy, monstrously heavy, there's no way you could carry it out. It was moved in with cranes.
Why couldn't that be the Phoenix Project?
I'm sorry?
Why couldn't that be the Phoenix Project?
It was the Phoenix Project.
Ah, it was. Okay, we tuned into that. Mr. T in Utah. What part of Utah are you calling from?
All of us would like to think we're unique, but you're certainly more unique than any of the rest of us, probably, with a dual birth date and all. I wonder if you'd mind giving out your birth information, since I like to do astrology charts.
If I would give out what?
Your birth information. You said your firstborn is Cameron in 1916?
That's right.
What was your first name?
It was Edward A. Cameron.
And what was your birth date?
4 August 1916.
August 4, 1916.
Right.
Do you know the time of day?
Approximately 4 a.m. in the morning.
And what city?
I was on Long Island.
Okay. By the way, I was living there in 1963 when you were there, too. Then you were born as Al Bielek in 1927?
Yes, that's what my birth certificate says.
And what date was that?
That was the 31st of March.
Well, happy birthday for that coming up here shortly. And was there any time on your birth certificate?
Yes, as I remember, it was 6:05 a.m.
You sure have an excellent memory, by the way. And where was that? What
I was in New York City.
There also, okay. And now the one Philadelphia experiment on July the 22nd of 43, do you remember the time of day of that one?
That first test was made?
Right.
Yes, both of them were made in the morning. The first one, if I remember correctly, was at 1000 hours. It should be 10 a.m.
Right.
And the second one was at 0900.
Let me see. Now the second one was August the 12th?
August 12th, correct.
0900. And do you know the time of the one in October? And did I get that right?
No, the one in October.
That was October 43.
Was at night.
That was at night, yes. Do you remember the hour or know anything of that?
Approximately 10 p.m., 2200 hours.
2200, okay. And you said there was another one in 1983, August?
No. That was not a ship test. The lockup to the Phoenix Project was on 12 August 1983.
12 August, and that was Phoenix, and that was not a ship, but it was something similar.
No, that was the other end, the other experiment in Montauk, Long Island.
Uh-huh. Now, you weren't there for that one?
I wound up there.
Yeah, but you didn't start there on it.
No, but we didn't start there. We started in 1943 as part of the Philadelphia experiment.
Right. Now, what time did the one start on Montauk? Do you know?
Sorry, what?
Do you know what time they started the experiment in Montauk, roughly?
They started that run about 1 August, and the equipment was on 24 hours a day until it crashed on the night of 12 August, 1983.
So that was a long time.
That was a long time. They were running it. For what reason they wanted to run continuously, we don't know, but that is in the log books and can be verified as such.
Mm-hmm. Let me say, you're mighty impressive, both with your memory and your knowledge of these things, and although the story seems incredible, you do make it almost credible.
Well,
it's almost palatable. Thank you. Thank you, Harold.
All right, Paul. What were your general feelings when you were in this time travel, time warp, whatever it may have been? How did your body feel?
I don't think at that point we were particularly concerned with how our body felt. The feeling was we didn't know what was going on. We were falling through space, if you will, and we didn't know where we were going or what was happening. I mean, that was absolutely unprecedented for us. Nothing like this had ever happened before. We were two rather happy-go-lucky guys who were in the Navy and had officers' ranks, and we still enjoyed our work and enjoyed living and all of this. And then everything went wrong. We jumped over, and we wound up falling, and wound up standing at Montauk.
And you did physically feel like you were falling?
Somewhat. It's very hard to describe.
Right. Okay.
Not the same as falling off a building, so to speak.
Right. All right. Now, a question about the men who reappeared or trapped in the metal of the ship.
Yeah.
Now, if you mentioned before there really wasn't a dematerialization, how, if there wasn't a dematerialization of physical aspects, were they trapped within the metal?
They were not trapped within the metal during the period when the experiment was functional. They were in their normal locations, moving around on the deck of the ship, and doing whatever their particular chores and assignments were below deck. When the equipment was shut down and the ship was in the process of returning to its normal space-time location, the damage had already been done to the personnel who were on deck in the sense that their time locks, and this gets in again to some metaphysical and fairly abstruse biological aspects, their time locks have been ripped loose. Consequently, they were already starting to drift in terms of time and the time reference. The ship had a time reference. It returned to the point where it started minus, or rather plus, 4 hours. The individuals had their time locks ripped loose. Consequently, they were drifting. And when the ship's fields collapsed and it reappeared in what we call a normal space-time, eventually some of these people, not all, but most of them reappeared in the space-time. If they had shifted in a physical position relative to the ship during the process of coming back to our normal space-time, they could be anywheres. They were lucky if they were floating in space, so to speak, and got their feet back on the decks, but unfortunately there were four, actually five, but there were four who wound up embedded in the steel because they rematerialized in terms of our normal continuum at the wrong place in the wrong point in time.
I see. Okay, and before I go here, what do you know about the government's capability at this point of utilizing time travel? Have, in your speaking and talking with many different people over the time, have you found out, is this going on now?
Very definitely, yes.
And can you elaborate at all on that? Give us some details?
No. In this place, I don't know much about it, except I know that the process does exist.
I think
it is used.
I think that's why Bob Lazar wants to get in touch with you. I really do think
it would be wonderful if Bob Lazar would call in and have a discussion with Al here. That would be absolutely incredible.
Well, how about getting Al Bielek and Bob Lazar in one location at one time so you can actually come by and ask him questions? How would that sound?
That sounds even better.
I don't know if we can do that. I'm not saying that, but that would be wonderful. And Bob Lazar is the type of person that just keeps himself very quiet for some
extra cover clothing.
I see.
You put on a pair of shorts or just a pair of slacks, you could tell very quickly.
You mean you saw them in an outfit like shorts and things like that?
Well, no, they normally wore regular clothes, but their skin was obviously not human.
I get it. Okay, Al Bielek is my guest. And by the way, if you would like a copy of what you have heard tonight...
Dismantled. And again, we get into this total discrepancy of time in terms of what they were doing there at the station and their control of time. They were in sort of their own universe, but nevertheless, it wound up there, and the crew was intact, and the ship was eventually dismantled partially. Now, the other aspect of this is whatever happened to the other two ships, we don't know. They probably just took off. There's no data anywhere as to say what happened to the other two that were left in 1943. But the one that went to 83 never returned anywhere else. It was trapped there, and there was no way of getting it out.
I can just barely hear you.
I say the one that went to 83 was trapped there in the underground. There was no way of getting it out.
Okay, now, a couple of questions immediately pop into my mind, Al, and I had told Bill that I wanted to get in touch with you and Preston at one point. I don't know if he had relayed that message or not.
No.
But... the fact that when you were in 1983, I believe you had stated that you were able to take some artifacts back to 43 with you, a magazine, I believe it was.
Took some artifacts back. Yes.
What happened to those?
I have no idea. They might have wound up in Van Neumann's file, and probably did. What happened to his file after this was all over is anybody's guess.
Well, from 43 to 47, though, you were still aware of what had transpired. Is that correct?
Yes. There was no attempt in that period of time to brainwash me or do anything to me. I was used by the Navy on another project after 43.
All right, Don Eckert, we thank you for your call this morning. You have one more question, and you can answer while you're off the air. Go ahead.
Okay, great.
I know you have one more, so go ahead.
How did you and Duncan happen to get together and you decide, Al, that you folks had been related when he was in a previous lifetime? That's something else that really intrigued me, and I wanted to find out how you guys found each other and made that determination.
Okay.
Well, it was more or less by accident.
Thank you, Don.
It was more or less by accident, if you want to call it an accident.
Mm-hmm.
In 1985, I attended United States Psychotronics Association annual convention in Dayton, Ohio. Now, I had met on the phone, at least, and in person once prior, Preston Nichols, who was from Long Island, and he had a big Tesla coil with him that year to demonstrate, and he brought with him a lab assistant, the name of Duncan Cameron. And I didn't know him from Adam at that point, or at least I thought I didn't. And in the course of the 3 days of that convention, getting to talk with Duncan, I had this very strong feeling. I knew him from someplace.
Uh-huh.
I did not know from where at that point in time as to where I knew him from, but I was absolutely certain I did, and he had somewhat similar feelings. I was invited from that convention to come visit Preston Nichols in his laboratory, Hypertech Laboratories, actually, in Long Island, which I did do in August of 85, and got to know both of them a little better. And eventually, in 1986, I moved to Long Island and sought work there and obtained work there, which didn't last too long, but that's beside the point. In August of 86, I moved to Long Island, and after much conversations on the telephone, and got to know both much better, and it was after the exposure to the Phoenix Project, actual vicinity and the actual property, and in the old buildings, what were left there, that I knew that I had some connection with that thing, and eventually the idea dawned on me and the feeling became stronger that Duncan was actually related to me. This was absolutely certain after the recall came back of the Philadelphia experiment.
Okay.
And that recall did not come back until January of 1988.
All right. Al Bielek is my guest. By the way, Al, Bob Lazar has indicated that he would like to talk with you on a one-to-one basis.
I would like very much to talk with him.
Okay, so that's settled. Then it's okay to give out your phone number to Bob Lazar.
I'm sorry?
It's all right to give out your...
Yes, do it privately, that's fine.
Here's my question. When you went to 1983, and then you went back, before you went back, had the ship been gone for 4 hours? In other words, did you change history when you went back and smashed the equipment?
The ship was gone approximately 4 hours, yes. Now, what was the rest of that question? I couldn't hear you.
From 1983, you went back to 1942.
43.
What's that?
We went back to 43, the same point in time where we had left.
Okay. Now, in 1983, before you went back, had the ship been gone for only 4 hours, or had it been gone permanently? In other words, in history, did you change history?
That's a good question. The ship was only gone a total of about 4 hours. It did not come in to the time period or time frame of 1983, but was in hyperspace, which means, in essence, so far as our reality is concerned, it was nowheres. I mean, this is a mathematical concept, and actually it exists as a reality, if you want to call it that, but it's not our reality. It is not the physical domain as we know it. And it was in that, you might say that, no man's land, a land of the Limberlost, whatever you want to call it. And when it did return to a normal space-time position, which was where it took off from, plus about 4 hours. I say about. I'm not absolutely certain at this point what the time frame was. Nobody really knew at that point. And I'm sure it's recorded in the Navy record someplace, but it was close to 4 hours. It may not have been exactly that.
Okay, but the question still remains. Well, put it this way. Before you arrived in 1983, did they have knowledge of the ship having disappeared completely, or was it still, as far as they was concerned, was it only gone for 4 hours?
You're talking about the view of the ship from the 1943 end or the 83 end?
From the 83 end.
In 83, they knew exactly what had happened because they had the records and the final reports. And literally, Van Neumann was waiting for us. And when we arrived there, we were escorted downstairs, if you will, down into the lower levels of the operation by the security people, and we were introduced to Dr. Van Neumann, who we didn't know who he was at first. We didn't believe it at first, but he finally convinced us, and this was the beginning of a total rude awakening to us as to what had happened. No, they did know at the 83 end what had happened, and this was the old problem of the time loop, completing the loop. That is a very complex business if you do not understand the aspects of time as to what it really means.
How's that, Bob?
Okay, well, what if you hadn't gone back? Do you think that that the history would have been different?
If we had not gone back?
Right.
Yes, things would have been different, all right. There's no question. The ship would have kept feeding the hyperspace bubble, and there's no telling what would have happened. Van Neumann was concerned that it might have destroyed a large part of Long Island, or worse.
Ooh, well. All right, Bob in L.A., we thank you very much for participating. For all intents and purposes, then, Al, what you're telling us is this technology was available to us since the early 40s.
Yes.
And so they could have made anything disappear. Anything they wanted to.
Just about. After they solved all the problems, which actually did not occur till 53.
Okay, but I mean, they could make anything disappear. They could do anything they wanted to do to destroy anything they wanted to do, right?
In a certain manner of speaking.
Yes, that's for sure. Okay, Al Bielek is my guest. And
when you left in 1943, first of all, how big was it? How long was the ship?
You're a little weak. When I got back to 1943, did you say?
Yeah, and how big was the ship? I can barely hear you, but how big was the ship?
How big was the ship?
Yeah.
There was a destroyer escort which says it was about 1,500 tons, and there's discrepancy in the figures, but it was approximately 1,560 tons fully equipped, about 1,240 dry, as they called it. Mm-hmm. It was not a very large ship. It was certainly no comparison to the large destroyers or the cruisers.
And it left in 1943, and it just popped up in, what did you say, Long Island in 1983?
No, the ship did not. Oh. The ship remained in hyperspace.
Oh, in hyperspace.
We were arrived in Long Island, the two of us.
Oh, two. Now, how did that happen?
We jumped ship, hoping to wind up in the water in the harbor to get away from
the ship and you landed.
Hold it. You're both talking at the same time. That's insane. Let's slow it down a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. He's answering your question, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay.
Now, as I say, the ship did not go to 83. It remained in hyperspace. We jumped ship, expecting to get away from the madness and what was going on the ship and wind up in the water in the harbor. We did not. We wound up in 1983, just the two of us, my brother and myself. And the ship remained in hyperspace until we were sent back to it to destroy the equipment or otherwise shut it down, whatever was required, so that the energies being created by the ship in the fields would cease. Then the ship returned to 43.
Can you picture that, Mike, in pilot's birdies?
Yeah.
Leaping off a ship and all of a sudden winding up elsewhere another year.
Yeah, I have another question.
Okay.
Your guest on Friday, is he any relation to Wilford Stone that's in the book Majestic?
I don't know. Wilford?
Wilford Stone, yeah.
A little weak there.
No, he's been answered as I was waiting, but the first question would be, Al, in effect, when you and your brother jumped ship, did you leave the hyperspace bubble that was enveloping or containing the ship?
Basically, yes, but at the same time, for reasons we don't fully understand, we were drawn to the 1983 terminal, and whether we remained in a hyperspace condition until we got to 83, I can only say that is probably what happened. We left the bubble around the ship because that is not all that large, but something else happened, and we made the transit to 83.
Well, as you mentioned, Dr. Van Neumann was perhaps was waiting for you.
Yes.
Now, I think this question was answered after you mentioned you had been brainwashed in 1947, but I was going to ask before that piece of information.
I'm sorry, what?
Did you meet yourself, but You explained some minutes ago that all knowledge or recollection of these events had been removed from your memory in 1947, and it didn't all come back to you until sometime after 1983. Is that correct?
Yeah, well after 83.
So my question would have been if, and it may be a strange one, but in your opinion, would it have been possible to have gone to 1983 in let's say real time, and to have met yourself?
Well, theoretically, this would be possible. As a matter of fact, they had to take a great deal of guard to make sure that this did not happen, because this is one of these areas that is very much a concern that you don't run into yourself, because there could be very serious problems if you did. Now, at that time, in 1983, when I arrived there from the Philadelphia experiment in 83, I was working in Los Angeles. So I was on the other end of the continent.
Uh-huh.
So there was little possibility of that. And I had not been on Long Island since, prior to that, since about 1963, roughly, was my last visit, until I went back to Long Island in 1985, August.
Ray in Carpinteria, have you sent us a picture of you yet?
Yeah, I had just 2 questions when I called, but I've got several since then.
That happens sometimes, doesn't it?
It blows my mind that you left in 43 and you landed in 83 and somebody was waiting for you. And the question from that is, how were you sent back? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Bob?
Bob? You got to 83. How did you get sent back to 43?
Well, first, we didn't get sent directly back to 43.
Well, I can't hear you now.
Okay, hold on a second. We've had no trouble up till now. Bob cannot hear. He's in Las Vegas.
Everything was good until now. How did he get back from 83 to 43? By what method did they use?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And the other question is, have there been other tests going on since then that you weren't involved in? You know, if you know of them, have there been other experiments?
Okay, Bob, we'll see if we can get the answers for you. Thanks for your call.
Thanks a lot.
All right, go ahead. Want to respond to those questions, Al, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, to answer those 2 questions, number 1, we got back from 83 to the ship by means of the hardware and equipment that was operational on the Phoenix project. They sent us back to the ship, which was in hyperspace. We would then, after we shut the equipment off, the ship went back with us to 1943. They sort of sent us back part way, but at the same time, being as in hyperspace, we were not really sent into a specific time. We returned to 43 with the ship when the equipment was shut down. Now, to answer your other question, well, have other experiments of this type been done? Yes, there was further work done after 1947. The project was resurrected by Navy's request, and they asked Dr. Van Neumann to look into it to see what could be done, if anything, to salvage the work that had been done prior. And he looked at it, and eventually, in the meantime, he was involved with some UFO recovery programs, which is probably in the domain of one of your other callers at another night. But he eventually found out what the problem was, had to develop a computer, and in 1953 they had a successful test for the so-called Philadelphia experiment. After the successful test with no personnel problems, the project name was changed to the Phoenix Project. They dropped the name Rainbow and changed it to Project Phoenix. And after that, other hardware was developed and it went on into other areas and other projects. But I was not part of any of that from 47 on.
All right, we'll get back to Al Bielek and your telephone calls.
I'm curious about CNZ. He saw both the equipment in 43 and the equipment in 83. Maybe you could make some comment on the state of the art.
Okay, can you hear that, Al?
Barely.
Okay, the question is, did you see the same equipment in 83 as you saw in 43? That's
No.
No.
No, the answer completely no. There was some similarity in terms of the approach, in terms of the mathematics, and in terms of the functioning design of the hardware, but it was more advanced and it was far more complex. And, shall we say, probably several generations later in terms of design. It was not identical equipment at all, and it was very, very large equipment in the Phoenix project.
How's that?
Much larger equipment, you think?
I'm sorry?
Do you have your radio on?
I don't.
Someone has a radio on. Who has the radio? Now it's not on anymore. Who turned it down?
I know he. Well, we both have been in electronics and seen the advancements from vacuum tubes to solid state, and I think they still use a lot of vacuum tubes for high power stuff. And I was just curious to whether they were still using them to obtain the high powers now that they did.
Okay, something's happening here. Can you hear me? He says yes, they are. Walt.
Vacuum tubes, very high-powered equipment, is the only way they can fly today in terms of generating large amounts of power and RF. I'll give you some idea. The output stages of the Phoenix project required the use of 2 amplotrons, which is a very large tube with coolant, magnetic field, and so forth, built by Raytheon. They're capable of putting out at least 1 megawatt continuous CW at a frequency of 470 megahertz. When they were pulsed, they were putting out actually gigawatts of power in the pulse mode. That's the kind of power that's involved.
All right, Walton Ventura, thank you for your call.
Thank you first for that T-shirt. It's a beautiful lime green color. I like it and I wear it.
Oh, you did get it?
Yeah, up in Pasadena, and there's a building here that in the 1940s and all the way until about 52 was taken care of, and they were in the basement of this building. It's now a 7th Circuit Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. It's always been a federal building. At any rate, in the basement of it, there is still a morgue and 2 rooms that are like tin-cladded, like for electronic countermeasures, intrusion, or they're cladded rooms. I don't know why they're cladded, but the rumor was from the orderly and stuff that there was always weird happenings going on down there, and like lightning fireballs and all kinds of weird stuff and screams and anyway, the rumor was that some people that were in the Philadelphia experiment, some sailors, were transferred out here to Pasadena to get them out of the area around there so there wouldn't be a lot of talk. Have you heard anything about that?
Not specifically, but I'm not the least bit surprised because the effort became enormous. In order to keep it quiet, they transferred people all over. Some of the sailors wound up in Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. As I know the stories were for some time, and I do recall something of this, that Al Bowen Sr., who was then the director of the Office of Naval Engineering, which later in 1946 was changed to the Office of Naval Research, did go down to Bethesda Hospital to see how the patients were doing, i.e. the survivors that came off the Eldridge. And they were in quarantine for 6 months. Now, whether after that they transferred some of them to the West Coast, I don't really know, because I was not privy to all of that. And it is entirely possible, because they did make great efforts to keep the thing quiet and kept it under the rug. It's a very interesting anecdote that you tell me, because I'm not aware of this.
Thank you, Tim in Pasadena.
Yeah, I got one more question.
Sure.
I have a friend that works for Battelle Labs, and I got a hold of the videotape of you speaking in Phoenix, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I sent it to him, and he was very interested in it. But since he does work at Battelle Labs, and he has a lot of friends that have access to a lot of research, he said he couldn't find any record of Einstein ever having been in connection with that testing, whatever it was that they were supposedly getting together on Long Island there. You said on that tape in your Phoenix speech, that Einstein and Tesla and all the boys were working together back then. And this guy that works at Battelle Labs says he's looked and looked, and he can't find anything that ties Einstein together with Tesla at this point working on this stuff.
Well, if you're talking about the period around 1943, it is public information in the record that Einstein joined the Institute in 1933, and he was there until his death, which was 1955. Now, Einstein was actually not directly involved as shall we say, a direct researcher in that specific project. He was the consultant at the Institute for all the projects which were then going on at the Institute, as well as perhaps some other government projects.
And that was the Institute of what?
Institute of Advanced Studies, Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm from Sun City now. We're not in Sin City yet here.
I'm in Sin City.
Not exactly the same.
No, I'm in Sin City.
That's correct.
Okay, Sun City.
We love your show.
Thank you, Steve.
Al, I have one question now, and I may follow with 2 or 3 more real quick. Your brother that died from accelerating aging, at what year did he die?
I'm sorry, he died what?
Your brother that died, you said he died from accelerated aging. He aged very quickly?
Yes.
What year did he die?
It was 83.
In 83. Now,
he was reborn. This gets into metaphysics, I know. But he was reborn, a new body, in 1951, and he was a walk-in in 1963 with the memories that preceded, at least most of them. And from 63 on, he was not at that age of 12 actually a part of anything, but in 1967 or 68, he again became involved in some of the government projects. This becomes a very long and involved story, but nevertheless, he was again picked up for some of these projects, but not the Philadelphia experiment. That was ancient history so far as he was concerned, and he probably had no recall of it, at least at that point.
Okay. Now, did he pick up the body of your younger brother at what age?
Would you restate that one?
I believe you claimed that he was a walk-on.
A walk-in.
A walk-in, and the body he picked up was that of the youngest son of your father?
Yes.
At what age did he pick up that body? How old was the body?
12.
12 years old.
Right.
Was the original being that inhabited that body of your brother, I mean, you may not have this information, but what happened to him, or was he disenchanted, or
the one that was in there up to that point left?
Now, the walk-in or walk-on, as you call it, was that controlled in any way by people within this government?
There was definitely a connection with government personnel and operations, but it also went beyond that. I
That's
do not
what I
know
figured.
all the details by any means as to who arranged this and how it was done.
But it was probably, I know you didn't allude to it, the possibility, you didn't say it was a certainty that it dealt with maybe the different alien forms that operate within our universe.
I'm certain that it did.
Okay, that answers my question. Hey, we love hearing you, and hang in there and keep getting on the shows. We need more of it put out.
Okay. The question was whether or not the body molecularly disassembles and reassembles. That process would be called instant transference, ITF, or teleportation, from point A to point B in the same time frame. No, that was not the case. The process involved transport through time with a body which was not disassembled but was left intact. But due to the fields that were involved interacting with the body and its body fields, the body moved intact through time and was not disassembled or reassembled. It remained in one piece, if you want to say that, put it that way. There was no breakdown and reassembly.
Okay. And was there another part of the question? I don't remember.
I'm not sure I do either at this point.
Okay, well, please.
In your last program, I'd like maybe if you could expand on a little further that some of the men on deck, when the ship returned, they were actually trapped in the metal plating. Is that correct?
Right, that is correct.
Were those men able to be saved, or
No.
were they dead, or what was
They died shortly after that. It was 4.
How about some of the other personnel on deck that weren't killed? You said that some of them were burned badly, and
yeah, some were burned badly. There were cases there where they burned, if you will, like the burning bush in the Bible without being consumed, and there was a very peculiar state of affairs for them. Others went quite insane. Some disappeared. There were stories that there might have been some others that jumped overboard and disappeared totally. We have no proof of that. But a number of people did disappear completely as a result of the experiment and did not reappear at all. And there was even 1 or 2 who faded in and out into invisibility and then came back.
was the Eldridge decommissioned that same year, or was it put back into service?
The Eldridge was completed in its commissioning, if you will. It was actually commissioned on August 27th of 1943, and that does coincide with the Navy's record, the official public record. But it did not go to sea right after that. After the equipment was declared a failure, all of that equipment was stripped, the missing gun turret was replaced, and the ship was outfitted for normal military service. So sometime in late 43 or early 44, it's probably late 43, it did go back to sea with a normal captain and a normal crew, and remained in wartime service until 46. In 46, it won the mothballs. 1951, as part of Truman's exchange program of the 50 old destroyers, as they were. Eldridge is not an old destroyer, but nevertheless, it's 50 destroyers that were transferred to the Greeks and others in Europe, and the Eldridge went to the Greeks, and was recommissioned by them under the name the Lion. But that was basically, very quickly, was the history of the Eldridge. It did see normal wartime service after that, after the experiments were over and declared a disaster. And
how's that, Ken?
I see. Had been removed and a completely new crew installed.
Okay, Ken? One final question, if you would. All right. It occurs to me that when you came to 1983, that there was quite an opportunity for the people there to send you back with some valuable information, specifically what was going to happen in the future as far as the fate of the war, maybe presidential assassinations. You know, the field would be just wide open. I wonder who made the decision not to send you back with information, and what that reason may have been.
Well, one of the reasons why you don't do a great deal of that is you are then tampering with time and tampering with history.
Well, would that be good or bad? You know, in other words, who's making that decision?
That's a good question. We were not sent back at that point with any specific other equipment or books or records or what have you. That decision is hard to say where that would come from. I don't know.
Did it occur to you when you were there in 1983?
Oh, it occurred to us that when we realized where we were, there was all kinds of interesting things that could have been done.
Was the subject even discussed?
I cannot recall specifically what it was, but as I do recall, there was that kind of discussion between my brother and myself.
Okay, Ken in Northtown, thank you very much for your call tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, my friend. Sailing, so to speak?
It is very possible because the Greeks don't scrap ships at the rate that we do.
Uh-huh.
They don't have the money, so to speak, and the funding to build a new ship every 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And it may well be in service.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know.
Let's see. I received a little note from one of our listeners in La Cañada, and told me about exactly what you just said. The Eldridge was sent to the Greek Navy as part of a military aid package in the 50s.
That's right.
It was and is still the Greek Navy ship, the Lion. He requested data on the Philadelphia experiment once from Naval Research, got back this information that he just passed on. Also, the Navy was and may have installed super-cooled liquid helium magnetic engines, of all things. The Navy sent me a 60s fact book. Okay, he goes on and on to say about that. The cover point of the book may be still available through government printing office publications. He says he pointed out to the Naval Research that strong biologically harmful EMI magnetic fields were produced by the engines. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, there is definite biological problems from very strong magnetic fields.
He says it sounds like it might be part of the Phoenix experiment. That is still secret and is connected with the Philadelphia experiment.
A lot of that work is still secret.
It's still secret. Where is it? Where is it taking place? Where are the experiments taking place?
Who knows at this point?
No one even knows, right?
The Navy knows, or somebody doing these experiments knows, but I do not have knowledge of that to any specific location.
Okay, Al Bielek is my guest. You're listening to the Billy.
You at a lecture in Solana Beach here.
Oh, yes.
You spoke about a 40-year Earth biorhythm, and it peaks every 40 years.
Correct.
Can you elaborate on that? And also, I'd like to take the question a little bit farther. What is going to happen in the year 2023 at that time with the government experiments?
Well, I can't predict what might happen in the future, year 2003 or 2023. The biorhythms go on, and it is a 20-year cycle. It's interesting how that was discovered. It was part of a research project by a friend of mine who was examining various things in terms of background noise from radio receivers. And it was from that he derived the information which looked like there was some kind of a long-term pattern involved here, and after running it through a computer with a large number of number crunching operations, he finally found there was something real going on with this, and he got some government money to do the research, and finally was able to prove that there was a 20-year cycle. There's 4 biorhythms involved with the Earth, and they all peak out once every 20 years, and that happened to be essentially on August 12th It could shift by perhaps plus or minus a day, but it's usually right on the 12th. And it's 43, 63, 83, and so forth. The significance of that is that it was on August 12th, 1943, when the final test with the Eldridge was conducted, and we had a drop-dead date for that test where the Navy came down from someplace on high and said, you will do this test, after the first one on July 22nd. And he said, you will complete this test by August 12th, or forget it. And Von Neumann had pleaded for much more time, and they wouldn't give it to him, and they knew very well that he would take every day and every hour he could, so it went off to the 12th. Now, it was also significant that on August 12, 1983, 40 years later, the Phoenix Project was running. Now, on the 22nd of July, I'm not sure whether the Phoenix Project was online then at that particular day or not. But even so, if it had been, there would probably never have been a lockup. The significance was that from August 1 on, the Phoenix Project was online 24 hours a day. This is out of the logbooks. And they were building power. But even so, going into it mathematically, there was apparently no basis for the lockup. And Neumann was arguing with himself and also with me for some years after that, up until 47, what happened, what was going on here. He couldn't understand why this thing happened. And he did not come to understand this, I think, probably until almost 1983. Now, the work on the biorhythms of the Earth, I believe, took place, for proving this, took place after that. This data is quite recent, perhaps in the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know exactly when it was derived. But it's significant in that without that peak out due to the Earth's biorhythms adding the additional energy, it is very possible that there never would have been a lockup.
How's that, Tim?
Hey, that's fantastic.
Okay, thanks for your call.
You bet.
Ask Mr. Bielek. He says he was working below in a metal room when this all occurred. I'd like to know how he was able to leave his post and get above and jump overboard.
How did we leave our post?
Yeah.
We walked out, literally, because we couldn't get the equipment turned off.
And then no one tried to stop you?
No. We were in charge of the equipment.
But I mean, as you were going up the steps, or as you were going across the deck, or what?
We went across the deck.
And no one tried to stop you. And could you describe exactly what you saw when you got above?
What we saw when we did what?
When you got above, when you got on deck. Exactly what you saw with your own eyes.
What we saw when we were on deck was strange, misty clouds, if you will, moving around, different colors. Some people were still standing and moving. There was one person, I believe, who had already fallen down. There were others trying to pick them up. And everybody was in total confusion. That is the people on deck. Now, there were other people below deck. There was a radio operator. There were people running down in the engine room and running equipment there. They were not affected. It was the people on deck who were affected. And it did not occur instantaneously. There was a buildup. So that what occurred was something which was a result of a considerable period of time of exposure. And we were not exposed to this until we came out on deck, and we didn't stay there very long.
That's when you leaped overboard, right? And wound up on Montauk. Okay, right.
Where were all of your superior officers during this time?
There was only one superior officer at that point, and that was the temporary captain of the ship. And I'm not even sure he was on board the ship, though theoretically he was supposed to be.
And no one said anything to you and your brother when you were leaving your post and running off?
Everybody was too confused to worry about that.
Oh, nobody was paying attention.
No, nobody was at that point hardly was in their right mind.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn.
Enjoy.
About demolecularizing the electrons in the body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to share this with you, and then I'll ask your guest a question. I was going to school in 1973, and 4 years prior to that, a guy was going to become a doctor, and instead he chose a different profession, and he was a professor at this college, and he had witnessed some experiments taking place in Florida, and it's sort of the beam me up Scotty kind of thing. He says they had two outlets, a sender and a receiver.
Yeah.
They were working on animals, and most of the time the animals were dead, but once in a while the animals were alive. And I don't know if you would know anything about this. You probably don't from what you're saying on the radio. But